First up, though, let's talk about BBC. And yesterday there were reports in the newspapers that the BBC had granted an amnesty to over 75s overpaying their TV licences after many said once it was required that over 75s would actually not be eligible for a free TV licence automatically. It would be depending on their income. It affected more than 4 million households. They denied that actually, and hours later, that actually there had been an amnesty and they would actually possibly face prosecution for failing to set up a new TV licence payment scheme. Well, let's talk about this with Duncan Simpson. He's Research Director at the Taxpayers Alliance. Good morning to you, Duncan.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, we know that there was this change in the ruling, and the BBC, instead of this had happened over a long period of time with George Osborne's shenanigans over the TV licence fee increases and the like, but it became the responsibility of the BBC to collect TV licence from those over 75 and to take up and deal with that cost of them not paying it. But now, sorry, apologies, I'm making it a bit more complicated than I need to here. Over 75s were automatically allowed to not pay it. Then it was made the case that if you had over a certain income, you would be required to pay your TV licence. But we know that huge numbers, we think nearly 700,000 of those people, 1 in 6 of those households basically said, well, no, we're just not bothered responding. They haven't chosen to pay their TV licence. And there was an assumption that actually if the BBC didn't stop this, they would have to stop prosecuting these people, hauling 80-year-olds into court. Has there been an amnesty or hasn't there been an amnesty?
I don't think there has been. So as you say, the BBC has sort of reissued a statement saying, no, this isn't an amnesty. They're allowing people a bit more time to sort of sign up for this process. So what is now the situation is that they are still offering some free TV licenses for the over 75s, but it's only pensioners who are in receipt of pension credit. So, some of the poorer households who are those over the age of 75. I think it's a real dog's dinner, a lot of this. I think, it's quite reasonable to maintain this exemption because ultimately, the concern for us is that the BBC isn't focusing on rooting out a lot of the elements of waste which are endemic in the organisation. For example, what happened last summer, Tony Hall, the former Director General, introduced a £100 million diversity scheme portfolio. I'm not sure exactly what the buzzwords were for that. And that speaks to a wider problem. Now, it is quite an expense for the BBC to actually maintain this. I think that the former policy of maintaining it for all over 75-year-olds was something like £750 million, or would have been, next financial year. It's still going to be quite a big outlay for the BBC. But our concern is that just the BBC is going to, get away with quite a few areas of financial mismanagement, which we found happen, time and time again.
But they can afford it if they choose to, depending on their own priorities for spending the money they do get. I have to say, I don't really have an objection in principle to over 75s paying for the TV licence. I don't see why my parents, who are very comfortably off, thank you very much, should be getting a free TV licence when somebody who's struggling in their early 20s has to pay for one. I mean, I just think that's absolutely absurd. But we know that often with these things, the cost of means testing it is part of the cost of administering it, and then it becomes very complicated. But realistically, the prospect of a little old lady in her 80s being hauled into court and told, well, unless you pay the fine, you're going to go to prison. I mean, we saw at one point, wasn't it like 1 in 10 cases in magistrates' courts were people not paying their TV licenses? It's clogging up the courts. It's making sort of criminals of people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens. There is a big problem here, all of which surely can be solved by whatever the funding of the BBC is. Should it not, if we're going to have state funding of it, should it not be out of state taxation? And then we deal with that problem already.
Well, it's already a very peculiar setup of how the BBC is funded. Obviously, it's overwhelmingly from the licence fee. There's a little bit of commercial income, for example, selling shows abroad and so forth. But ultimately, you have to go through this slightly arcane process whereby the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport every few years has to agree the funding assessment for the organisation. I think a much more reasonable process for an organisation of the size of the BBC would be to transfer entirely to a voluntary subscription model. I mean, you have numerous objections, not least from the from ministers at the moment. That's happened now. It's happened over recent years. But I think the BBC is always going to be in this slightly funny situation whereby they say on the one hand, well, ultimately we're a bit of a national treasure, right? So we're almost kind of exempt from kind of these things. But on the other hand, it's a very competitive marketplace. You see, so we're competing with ITN and News UK and numerous other people. So they can't really have it both ways. So either they are kind of immune to competitive pressures rather than so therefore a lot of people who choose to work for the BBC are doing it out of a selfless rationale intent, that's fine, good for them, or it's a normal competitive process for this kind of stuff. And I think to remove that kind of challenge to the BBC, they are not going to. We have to remove the current funding model, and I would also say more widely as well. As we touched on this at the beginning of the interview, I think the BBC is a well-capitalised organisation. If you look through their accounts, I mean, their income last year was about £3.5 billion for the licence fee. Their balance sheet is very strong. Not least sort of lots of intellectual assets and so forth. So this is not an organisation on death's door. The idea that they wouldn't be able to manage a transference of, or rather a change of income from a compulsory tax to a voluntary process, they could absolutely.
And indeed, they say they're such good value for money. I'm wondering why they think people wouldn't want to buy them. Thank you very much indeed for actually spending it on site better than I did. Duncan Simpson, TaxPayers Alliance Research Director there. Thank you very much indeed.